I'm going to move some of the chairs back. All right, next, we've got one of our most loved talks by Paulette Koronkevich. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Awesome, awesome. So she's going to be talking about getting the most out of ICFP. I've loved this talk the last few times I've seen it, so best of luck.
Thank you. Yeah, so on that last question, I have a lot of advice, so get ready. So hi, I'm Paulette. Let's see if this works. Yay, it does. Okay. I'm a third year, starting my third year of my PhD at UBC, which in retrospect, I realize not everyone knows what that is. That's the University of British Columbia, just a few hours north of here. And I've attended some conferences. I say some because obviously I've not attended as many as some of the people on this panel, but I feel like I've attended enough to kind of get the vibes and give you some advice. And I myself was a PLMW attendee all the way back in 2017, also at ICFP. I've been attending ICFP ever since, and I love it. And I'm really honored to be here talking to all of you. It feels very weirdly intimidating to be on this stage. I don't want to be above you. It's kind of weird, but I thank you to the PLMW organizers for letting me give this talk again. This meme isn't really that relevant anymore because clearly I'm back by popular demand. So, okay, so I do want to give a little bit of a caveat about advice, which is, I'm going to be giving you all of my opinions and all of my advice in this talk. Please take it with a grain of salt. Don't, believe that what I say is the end all be all. If you find that you don't really jive with something, that's totally fine. You kind of make your own decisions about what you want to take, when you want to leave. Okay, so you all are just starting out. So your impression of a conference so far might be, oh my God, there's a lot of research talks. There's a full schedule of them, not to mention 2 parallel tracks this year, wow. And there's a ton of strangers. But I invite you to kind of flip your perspective here, where you can kind of approach a conference instead as an opportunity to make a lot of friends, maintain a personal schedule rather than the, attending everything at all possible in the conference, which is impossible unless you can split yourself up. And it's inevitable we're all here for a bunch of research talks. And so I kind of maintain this people-first perspective because my idea of a conference is really engaging with the community. So when you read papers, when you review papers, when you write papers, you're doing this all for a community. We all kind of collectively decide the things we're kind of interested in. And more importantly, I think, feeling a part of a community is where you're going to do your best work. If you don't feel a part of a community, you might find yourself trying to overcompensate in some way to feel connected, or you might even just feel rejected right off the bat and not, want to continue at all. So this is why I really maintain this kind of people-first perspective. Okay, so let's talk about the first part of a conference, which consists of a lot of strangers, or meeting a lot of strangers and making friends. So you might be wondering, it's really hard to meet people. Why even bother doing it? So in the short term, it will make your week much more enjoyable. You'll have people to go to talks with, discuss talks with, discuss memes with, discuss whatever you want with, go to dinner, do all these fun things in Seattle if you've never been. So in the short term, a much more enjoyable week. But I really like the long-term benefits you get from meeting people at a conference. So the 3 main ones I see is through meeting people, you build up a support system for wherever you go in life. You kind of expose yourself to a lot more opportunities, and you end up being able to foster some potential collaborations. All right, so let's talk about building a support system. So despite how people might want to present themselves, really no one gets through life alone. We are inevitably social human beings. And this kind of support system, if you're interested in grad school or research, is really important, I think, really more than I can say. Being able to talk to people who have gone through a PhD is super helpful in, getting the confidence to believe that you can also make it through. And having that kind of support is really unquantifiable. So being able to meet people, build up that support people system, having people you can kind of turn to, super, super important. So for me personally, coming to conferences is always super fun because I get to see a lot of the same people I keep seeing year after year. These are some pictures from the last 2 in-person conferences I went to, last ICFP and Popple back in 2020, which big gap in between the years, as we all know. I also mentioned that by meeting people, you're going to be exposed to much more opportunities. So you learn a lot about potential careers. So there's a lot of industry jobs as well. We have a lot of industry sponsors. I recommend talking to people from there. They're probably very happy to talk to you about the kind of research they do. But even within academia, there's all kinds of different research projects, software projects, and you wouldn't otherwise know this unless you were put in a room with all these people, right? And additionally, as more of a kind of a side note, you can kind of discover new hobbies, take them on so you also seem like an interesting person, which is personally what I like to do. And again, you would probably, if you weren't exposed to so many people, you might not even know about certain hobbies. So for my experience, starting out, I didn't quite know what professors did. So before I even attended a conference, I kind of assumed, professors are here to just teach my class that I'm attending. But then I discovered by going to PLMW back in 2017, I got exposed directly to the kind of research that professors often engage in. And in terms of hobbies that I've learned about, especially at ICFP, it seems like people at ICFP are super into t-shirts. So for reference here, Jane Street is a sponsor of ICFP, and they make these awesome t-shirt designs. You're probably going to see them all around this week. We might have already seen some designs. And I want to thank Kartik for giving me these pictures of the t-shirts, because I don't have such an awesome collection. I only have 1 or 2. Okay, finally, another great benefit of meeting people is fostering potential collaborations. So especially when you're starting out, you really need a lot of guidance in learning completely new areas and being able to start a project and kind of figure out what you're doing. And an added benefit is this ties back to the first point, where you can also end up building up your support system by having collaborations with different people. So in my experience, I actually met my supervisor here at ICFP. This is him in a cat costume, which I just use any excuse to use this photo. So I actually met William before he started his faculty position. And if I hadn't gone to a conference and met William and had known where he was ending up, I wouldn't have even applied to my current institution. So funny how fate works out. Okay, so I'm talking a lot about the benefits of meeting people. It's very important, and you're like, okay, but how do I actually start? Well, a great way to start is always starting with your peers. It's always easier to talk to your peers. Man, it would be really great if we get a bunch of people together who are just starting out, might be their first time attending a conference, and then we get them all together and get them to meet each other and get a little group. That would be great. Why don't we do that? Oh, we're here now. We're at PLMW. We do this because it helps a lot. So you can't expect me to talk about meeting people without having you to have some time to meet each other here. So I'm going to give you about maybe 5-ish minutes to go ahead and do that. You can talk about whatever. If you haven't discussed why you're at PLMW, I suggest starting off with that. But if you need a question to start off with, just talk about what your favorite place is, or part of where you live. And I'll also come around for a bit. Okay, I'll give you all about a minute to wrap up. Alrighty. Thank you all for participating. Trying to get back. I love that these conversations keep happening. Yeah, we need a bell. In Slovenia, they had a bell. Alrighty, let's get back to it. Thank you all for participating. I love that it takes a while to wrangle people in. It happened last year too. So you guys are all bright and very excited to meet people, which is awesome. Okay, so obviously meeting your peers at PLMW is awesome. If you come away this week with mostly just having met PLMW people, I consider this a great success. But obviously you might want to expand beyond PLMW, especially for all the benefits I mentioned. And so to get started on that, it turns out this PLMW is put on by a bunch of people who care about students and want you to be successful. So if you feel intimidated about meeting certain people, obviously talking to everyone involved at PLMW is a great start, and they might be very helpful in introducing you to even more people. And so, know that all the people involved here, including me, I guess I don't have my picture up there, but you can see my face now, are here to help and want you to succeed. So speaking of expanding beyond PLMW, some of you might be here with people you already know from your institution, maybe a few professors, and I find the best way to meet people is to be introduced by someone else. And so I'm going to challenge you that if you already know someone here and you've met someone at PLMW, introduce the two people. And as you get to know more people this week, keep that kind of chain of introductions going. Ooh. Okay, as noted during the panel, that you've noticed that there are some conversation circles happening during the coffee breaks, and they'll happen during lunch as well. And so I know I kind of gave the caveat about advice, how I, just take the advice that you kind of think applies to you, but I really hope that you take the following advice about these conversation circles. So one is always try and make room for people to join. If you see someone kind of nudging their way in, try and just open it up, right? And then, of course, give them a chance to introduce themselves. If you're already kind of engaged in a conversation, it can be hard to find a natural stop, but do the best that you can. And when you find yourself kind of entering a circle, introduce yourself, right? Sometimes it's easier to just kind of hang around and listen to other people's conversations, and you can learn a lot from doing this. But I really do recommend you try to introduce yourself when you enter one of these conversation circles. Okay, and inevitably, when we enter a conversation, we might start off with some small talk. So some very typical small talk at a conference is, what's your research? Everyone wants to know, what did you think of some talk or keynote? What talk are you excited about in the next session or overall at the conference? And, are you giving a talk? So these are pretty typical questions. But I have some small talk questions that I think are pretty fun. So, for example, do you have a pet? And can I see pictures of them? So I'm a huge fan of cats. So if you have a picture of cats, I will always be happy to see them. If you're a goose, how would you cause chaos in a local park? It's very fun to imagine senior PL professors as geese. I'm sure they would love to imagine that as well. How long, on average, can you keep a plant alive? That'd be an interesting discussion point. Side note, my supervisor has a ton of plants in his office, and I think that bodes well for how he takes care of students. And then this is actually more of a serious one, and I think it's a great question. So what's something you wish you could have touched on in your talk from a speaker? I guarantee they're going to go on a long tangent. Make sure to ask them very follow-up questions.
Everyone's going to ask this to you now.
What's something I wish I could have touched on in my talk?
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know. We'll see where the talk goes, and then maybe I'll be like, I should have mentioned this other thing. But ask me after. So yeah, I love this question. People will talk your head off about it, and it's a good opportunity to get in the practice of asking when you're confused about things. And really, for me, when I find people ask me questions about something they're confused about what I just said, I'm like, oh, this is a learning opportunity for me to be able to present my research better. So we really appreciate that. Finally, strangers are a lot like spiders. They're more scared of you than you are of them. So in kind of an introverted community, people obviously want to still interact with each other. That's why we're all here. But initializing the conversation is really hard for a lot of us. And so if you find yourself being able to start a conversation, people really appreciate that. And that's something I've learned being in computer science for so long. Of course, you want to always keep in contact. My contact info is at the end. And you can kind of choose your mechanism for doing that. My mechanism in the past was Twitter, but now Twitter is dead. So now, I don't know, maybe we'll just communicate by pigeons, I don't know, we'll see. And speaking of keeping in contact, make a website. I know it's hard, and I'm just casually saying that, but honestly, if senior professors can get away with just having an HTML page with a picture that's 20 years old, you can get away with any kind of website, honestly. The main thing is it's just got to have a name and your email, just so people can contact you. I have a really embarrassing story. I'll tell it very quickly. When I met William, my supervisor, I didn't have a website, but apparently I still had an internet presence of when I was in first year. I had to make a website for my scholarship program, and it was just a really dumb WordPress kind of thing, and it just had random things on it. And I was so embarrassed that he had found this. And I was like, oh no, I have to scrub everything. I have to actually make an official website. So don't be me, basically. Okay, so that was a lot about people, but I hope it was helpful. The second component of a conference that I mentioned is having a personal schedule. So let's talk about scheduling your time. I'm going to start off with some overall advice, and then we'll kind of wrap up with kind of an example daily schedule. Okay. I'm not sure what I was trying to say here. Some don't dead open inside vibes. Oh, okay. This is what I was trying to say. So my main piece of advice is don't attend every talk. I know it's very hard for some of you who are really interested in the kinds of things that are being presented. You see all these talk titles and you're like, wow, that sounds amazing. I want to go to every talk. But if you do this, you're going to get burnt out really early, and then you might end up attending less days of the conference, which is not desirable. So it turns out that the conference organizers are gracious enough to organize the conference into sessions. Thankfully, for us, it makes it very easy to kind of schedule our time around these sessions. So these sessions consist of kind of related talks. They usually have kind of a title, and then you can kind of see how all the talks are related by that title. But you may be wondering, okay, which sessions do I actually attend if I don't know what any of the words mean? They often have confusing titles, especially if you're new to the field. So you could research some of the things that you see in talk titles. You could read the abstracts of the papers if you'd like. You could choose randomly. Honestly, you can't really go wrong with that because everything here is interesting. Or take this as an opportunity in your conversations to ask people, what sessions are you attending, or ask a friend. So in the past, ICFP has actually not had parallel sessions, so I kind of gave this advice with a caveat of maybe at a different conference this is relevant. But it turns out we do have sessions running in parallel this year, which is super exciting. And if you find that maybe one session, the entire session doesn't really appeal to you, but one talk does, and then you mostly want to go to this other session, I just want to let you know it's totally fine to switch between sessions. Just want to make sure that we do it kind of respectfully because there's people usually in the hallway and it's loud out there. So the typical way to do this is right after the questions, you can kind of get up and walk out, close the door behind you quietly, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I know I said don't attend every talk, but I do recommend attending all of the keynotes. The keynotes are given by great people. They're longer. They're like an hour long. They give you a lot of explanation about this, whole research area and the things that people are interested in. And they're generally really, really great. So I really recommend attending all the keynotes. Okay, so I mentioned I would give you all an example schedule of your days. So as I mentioned, you want to attend the morning keynote. There's a coffee break, so you can get recaffeinated for the next session or your drink of choice. And after the morning session, there's usually lunch. So after you eat lunch, you might find, oh, I'm kind of feeling a food coma. So might be where you kind of build in your rest. And then you can catch the second afternoon session. And then, of course, a good way to meet people is, of course, the receptions and dinners that happen. Now, you can see that in that example schedule, I explicitly built in rest. So some of you might be adjusting to a new time zone. So physically, rest is important because you're trying to adjust to the schedule, but also mentally, right? Our brains are working really hard to pay attention for so many hours on end. And so you want to make sure that you're getting rest so your brain is working at full capacity. Plus, if you don't get enough rest and there's lots of coffee breaks, you might end up feeling like this, or you might end up falling asleep. This is my supervisor last year, just calling him out. I did ask if I could call him out like this. So you don't want to be like William in this picture. Again, I'm emphasizing all of this about rest because, again, maintaining a lighter daily schedule is going to result in attending more days of the conference instead of trying to do everything in the first 2 days and then being literally unable to get out of bed on the third day. So for me personally, I always attend all of the days, even the associated workshops, but I do end up skipping sessions to go try some tasty treats, love desserts, or I make friends with the locals and go and see their cats, which is what that little picture is. Okay, finally, we're getting to the meat of research conferences, which is research talks. So I just want to begin with the most obvious thing, which is talks are really, really hard to understand, and you're going to find yourself kind of sitting there with the talk going over your head a lot of the time. And why is this, right? So it turns out research talks are super highly specific. They end up being about things that people have been studying for years, and you just got here, so of course it's going to be difficult to understand. They're often structured as kind of a teaser for the paper. So they're really, you'll often hear speakers say, if you want to learn more about this, go read our paper. It's like, well, I'm here now. I don't have the paper in front of me. I want to know this now. But they're really trying to get you to read the paper because, they spent all this time putting in all this explanation, but they only have, 20 minutes to get through it, right? A lot of them assume knowledge background, of course. It would be difficult not to. Otherwise, we'd be up there speaking for 8 hours, trying to get everyone up to speed. And then finally, a lot of them are aimed at experts. A lot of them are kind of like even my talk earlier was kind of like, you specifically, I want you to know this so we could talk about it later, So, and that usually doesn't include you, unfortunately. So all of this is to say is that research talks are not like a lecture that we're so used to attending. We're much more used to lectures kind of slowly building up on new topics. You might be sitting there thinking, where's the explanation for any of these words that you're talking about? And again, it's very much okay to be like this. I'm still like this very much of the time. And it turns out that, it's not really attending research talks. It's more like kind of marinating, maybe. Spacing out, that's very common. Don't have enough caffeine, sitting, and confusion. So some alternate titles for this kind of session. And I know I'm giving this talk to all of you, but it's kind of a reminder to myself as well. I still struggle with this idea. I go to talks and I'm like, I should know these things, right? And then, they're 3 slides in and I'm like, okay, no, I totally have no idea what's going on. And it's really all about being okay with the unknown. So being able to recognize that when you enter a talk, you might be confused, right? And being really comfortable with this is actually really key to maybe still getting something out of the talk. Choosing my words carefully here. I'm saying getting out of a talk rather than learning something specific from a talk. Because it turns out there's actually a lot you can still get out of a talk. So what one might get out of a talk is, the structure of research talks. You'll probably pick up on this pretty quickly. the motivation for certain research. So you might not follow the entire talk, but maybe the first few slides are really well motivated. Or you might have not gotten the motivation, but then once they start talking about their solution, you kind of tune back in and you're like, okay, I'm kind of getting the high level of this. Of course, these are all really amazing things to get out of a talk. And sort of the reality is, what you might get out of a talk is, well, this is really confusing. Very fine. You'll get lots of terms to Google later. I'm already writing down some myself. And then you'll discover that we really love our funny symbols. I mean, seriously, as many as possible. These particular funny symbols are from my former lab mate's paper, Is Size Typing for Coq Practical? This is Jonathan Chan's paper with Yufeng Li and William Bowman. And it's tomorrow at 10:30, so I'm just giving some free advertising for John. And of course, I mean, with a question like that, you have to go see the answer. Okay, so being able to be comfortable with the unknown and kind of relaxing your brain is actually really helpful for meeting people, these senior PL researchers that we're so intimidated by. If you find yourself being okay with being confused,
I think it says
okay. Yeah, so for questions later, eat the microphone is the stage there. So being able to understand that we're all at different stages and we're all here to help will really help in, talking to people that you might be intimidated by. And yes, I know this talk is for all of you, but it's also a little bit for me as well. It's a good reminder, good way to start the week. To remind myself, it's okay. There is actually kind of a benefit to drowning your brain in so much information. So in my personal experience, I once took a course where the professor basically, the lectures were almost like research talks in the sense that there was a lot of technical terms and I was just like barely holding on, and a lot of times I wasn't holding on and I had no idea what they were talking about. And 6 weeks in, I was like, okay, I'm totally confused, I'm lost, I need to drop this class. So I'm like, complaining to the professor. And I'm like, look, I just can't keep up with all this. And she said, well, the point of this is just to kind of like drown your brain in information and have you pick out the patterns. And here's some patterns I really hope that you've gotten over the past week. And she told me explicitly, and I was like, well, I have been picking up on that. And she's like, that's great. That's all I really wanted. But it would have been nice to know that. But so essentially, we're kind of pattern-seeking people. You might be coming to this conference, marinating in a bunch of talks, not knowing how anything is connected, and then years later, be like, oh, I remember seeing this like 5 years ago at ICFP. I wonder how this is related, and come back to it, right? And it turns out, instead of avoiding predators, now we come up with a ton of math symbols and think about math all the time. So, okay, here's my final advice. Final, for real, final. I didn't really know where to put this, so I'm just kind of putting it in at the end here. Try and take some time to journal every day. So you might be thinking, oh, this is obvious. I'm going to take notes during research talks. That's great, but I also recommend taking notes about your interactions with people, the people that you meet, the conversations you have, if you can find the time and remember it all, because looking back on it, you might find some nuggets of ideas that will be great to work on in the future. Okay, so to wrap up, I started this talk talking about my view of the conference, which is very people-oriented. There's lots of opportunities to make great friendships. I also try and maintain a personal schedule that works for me in terms of getting enough rest. And of course, there's lots to know about attending research talks. So just as a reminder, making friends is a great way to grow your support network. And be sure to introduce yourself to lots of people and introduce others between each other. I do challenge you to do that. My biggest advice for maintaining a personal schedule is try not to attend every talk and to build in rest into your schedule. Finally, recognize that you're still learning when it comes to research talks. There's still much to get out of them, even if you don't understand every single thing. Just try and relax your brain and be comfortable with it. Thank you all very much, and I can take any questions that you might have. Yeah, and don't forget that advice about eating the mic.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. For students who are giving a talk at ICFP, how would you suggest they split their time between preparing for their own talk and attending other talks on the same day? Because it can be quite hard to figure out how to balance their time between the two.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was very lucky that my talk this week was literally today at 9 a.m., so I was like, bam, done. But last year, I had my talk on like one of the last day of ICFP. So what I did was I actually did a lot of the prep work before ICFP and then focused mostly on ICFP. But then I did find myself in the evenings kind of going back and making sure to review my slides again. And then also there's obviously the coffee breaks. It's great to take that time to talk to people, but if you feel stressed about your talk, you can always just find a little corner somewhere and review your slides. But sometimes I also find for myself personally that rehearsing a talk over and over again kind of stresses me out more than if I rehearse it a bunch of times, then come back to it like 2 days later when I've sort of forgotten what exactly I wanted to say, and then it comes off a lot more naturally, and I find feeling a lot more confident after that.
Hello, thanks for the talk. When you're at business or industry networking events, the de facto is LinkedIn. When you're at these kind of events and you're in circles and want to connect people afterwards, what's the standard way of doing that? Is LinkedIn still used, or you said Twitter is dead? So
Yeah, Twitter was a good one for that. So like I mentioned, I think the biggest way is still people's websites. So if people get your name, they'll look you up and find your email or your LinkedIn. That's pretty common. But you can also just straight up give people your email, and that's how I communicate with academics. Seems like we all really like email still, and we used to like Twitter. Well, some of us still do. But yeah, so it's usually people just looking you up and finding you and talking to you after. I don't. Maybe people still use LinkedIn, but I don't. So.
Okay. Hello. Wait. Test.
Eat the mic.
Well, okay.
Sorry.
So, does this work? Okay. Quick question. Very stupid question.
No.
I'm probably biased though, because I've been using it 4 years. But have you considered Mastodon?
I am technically on Mastodon, yes.
There we go.
Yes, but it doesn't feel quite the same as Twitter to me.
Another question. What would be a question that you wanted to be asked but weren't asked? And what would your answer to that question be?
Wow. Now that's hard. What is a question I would have been asked? Oh man, I really don't know. All these questions so far have been great. Yeah, I'll get back to you. This is a typical cop-out answer that people have, which I've used myself, which is, let's talk offline about it.
So I have an answer to how you can follow people. This is a feature maybe not everyone knows about. On Google Scholar, you can follow individual researchers, and it will notify you when they post something to archive or have a published paper by email. I find this is really useful. I follow many people on Google Scholar now.
Nice. I did not know that, so that would be great. Oh yeah, turn it off when you're reviewing. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you met your advisor and how that turned into you doing a PhD with him and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm going to be honest here. I actually wanted to work with William as advisor initially, and I read a lot of William and Amal's papers. I was like, oh, these are great papers. This is the kind of stuff I'm really interested in. And so when I saw William at the conference, I was like, okay, this is great. I really want to meet this person and talk to them just about their work and what it's like to work with Amal. And I actually got introduced by a professor from my university who knew William. So, the chain of introductions helps a lot. And then, so then it ended up, we talked a lot, and William told me, I'm still interested in continuing this line of research. You should come work with me instead if you want to do this specifically. So that's kind of how it worked out. But yeah, I actually got introduced by someone else, and so that's why I really advocate people introducing each other. But also, again, if you find someone's research interesting, you can just go up and say that.
Any more questions?
Everyone's super ready for lunch.
What made you pick the supervisor that you picked, and what do you think is an important thing to look for in a supervisor?
Yeah, I do have a lot of opinions about this. So William and I get along really well. Again, I guess I really maintain this people-first perspective everywhere I go. But the fact that I feel really comfortable with William and being able to, be able to say, like, look, I'm really struggling with this problem, or look, I don't know this thing that you're talking about, being comfortable enough with that, I think is made me way more successful than I would have been with anyone else, where I might have been intimidated or overworked myself to seem a certain way rather than just being myself. So to me, number one is if you have a good relationship with your supervisor, like everything else to me is secondary. It happened that we have a lot of the same research interests, and that's also super good. But research interests change, and your supervisor can help supervise projects that they might not necessarily know a lot about, but they have experience supervising. So in the end, the research can be anything, but the how you mesh together is not really negotiable in my mind.
All right, we've got about 3 more minutes for questions if anyone has any last ones. Otherwise, we could go to lunch early.
Yeah. Get in line first.
All right, cool. Give it up for Paulette.
Thank you all.